Evidence Not Seen by Darlene Deibler Rose. Faint lights could be seen on the distant shore. Just when they began to relax, the ordeal seemingly over, Russell's canoe struck a submerged rock and overturned. Every person and piece of gear plummeted into the tumultuous, icy lake. The piercing cries for help from the carriers awoke the government personnel. Russell and the carriers swam madly in the current, and all managed to scramble aboard the second canoe. They bailed frantically, for the canoe, now severely overloaded, was shipping water. Lanterns appeared, and kind hands helped to pull the canoe onto the lake shore. Though water-soaked, every man and piece of luggage was eventually salvaged. At midnight on January 13, 1939, Russell, a lone pioneer missionary, stepped foot on the land, like Joshua of old, to lay claim to the territory and all of the primitive tribes scattered throughout the interior valleys and ridges, anticipating the time when all would hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. At dawn, Russell peeked out of the makeshift government hut, only a little rested but eager to meet the native people. Dozens of dark brown, pygmoid people with full lips and broad noses swarmed around the post during the morning, curious to see the newcomers. One brave man quickly offered his bent index finger to Russell, who stood back and watched as the patrol officer reached out and clasped the man's finger between his own bent index and middle fingers. Both then pulled their hands apart and downward, producing a sharp snap. This was repeated many times. The more snaps and the louder, the more certain the bond of friendship. Feeling brave with his newly learned greeting, Russell mingled among the people. Their wiry hair was caked with dirt and ashes, and their small bodies were smeared with a combination of mud and pig fat that closed the pores and substituted for clothing. The men's complete attire was a phallocrypt gourd, which hung from a string around the waist and was held in place by another string around the scrotum. Little girls wore grass skirts, women wore brief string or rope skirts. The women and girls carried net bags that hung from their heads, functioning as a carry-all by day and a Stone Age version of thermal underwear by night, as they stretched them around their small bodies. A hole was pierced in the nasal septum of both boys and girls at an early age. A straw was inserted in the hole until the perforation healed. Then a small reed replaced the straw. Periodically, the reeds were exchanged for one slightly bigger, until the hole was large enough for the men to wear a pig tusk or a piece of bamboo, and the women a reed or stick pointed on either end. All had pierced ears, not for earrings, but for an occasional quill from the cassowary feather. Or, more practically, the holes functioned as a storage place for roughly crafted cigarettes or bamboo pipes. Without trousers, shirts, or pockets, they found ingenious ways to store necessary items. Necklaces fashioned from shells or the teeth of dogs or rats were worn by both sexes. Wigs fabricated from cassowary feathers commonly covered the balding heads of the proud but aging men. The kapaku houses were built of hand-split planks pointed on one end and pounded into the ground for a crude framework. The trees were felled with stone axes. The trimming or shaping of the planks was done with stone adze. The walls were a single thickness, and the roof was of tree bark. The floor was bare earth, with 3 stones forming the fireplace. The householders slept around the fire in a tight cluster with the pigs, especially the piglets that were being suckled by the women when a mother pig had died. More than 30 varieties of sweet potatoes were grown and tended by the women in the surrounding lake area. In the absence of cooking utensils, the sweet potatoes and edible greens were sometimes steamed with hot rocks in an outdoor pit, but they were more often roasted in the hot ash under the coals in the indoor fire pit. Pigs killed for spirit appeasement, rats, crawfish, tadpoles, birds, caterpillars, witchery grubs, bee and wasp larvae, grasshoppers, stink bugs, and other insects supplied interesting varieties of protein in their diet. The kapakus exchanged cowrie shells as money. Russell found that a large, fat pig or a young, strong wife could be bought for the same price. A string of from 40 to 60 yoke, the old, thin cowries. It dealt my female pride a blow to know I would be considered no more valuable than a dirty, fat hog. Dividing his time between first-hand experience with the Capacus and the friendly, knowledgeable government personnel, Russell was able to ascertain what materials and arrangements were available locally and what would have to be brought in to establish a permanent mission station. Russell was at the point of complete physical exhaustion. Understandably, he faced the arduous trek back to the coast with reluctance. During his stay, the patrol officer became very ill with fever, and when the governor dispatched a Navy plane to evacuate him, the officer requested, against standard procedure, that Russell be allowed to accompany him. "Look at his feet. He'll never make it back to Oeda alive." 3 hours later, they deplaned in Manokwari. From there, he booked passage on an inter-island steamer to Ambon, where Mr. Post joined him, and then to Makassar. That providentially arranged plane ride saved Russell the impossible trek to Oeda in exactly 1 month of travel time. One morning, after Russell had told the final episode of his story, Dr. Jaffrey walked into the bedroom and saw me tearing the dead tissue off Russell's feet, the blood and pus running. A wave of nausea passed over his face. Then he turned and without a word abruptly left the room. He closeted himself in his bedroom, and when I called him at noon, he said he would not be out for lunch. About 4 that afternoon he walked out and laid a manuscript on the table in front of me. I picked it up and read the editorial for our field magazine, The Pioneer. This morning I looked at the bleeding feet of a missionary, saw his wife tending them, saw the blood and pus running from them, and thought to myself, what a nauseating sight that is. But as I walked from the room, the Lord kept saying to me, "Oh, but to me they are beautiful feet." Then I remembered, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings to men and women like those in New Guinea who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. Some day it will all be over. Some day the tired, bleeding feet of the missionaries will for the last time cross those broken bottle limestone mountains. Some day, for the last time, they will go down into one of those newly discovered valleys. Some day, for the last time, they will speak the message of redemption through Jesus Christ our Lord. Some day, that last one will turn to Jesus. Then the clouds will part asunder and our Savior will be there. Reverently, I laid the manuscript on the table and lifted my tearful eyes toward the east. I knew that soon I would join the long line of intrepid missionary pioneers who had walked unto the unknown to lift up his ensign on the mountains and lay a claim for the Lord. From that day on, although hurting at the pain Russell was experiencing when I dressed his feet, I thrilled to think my Lord was looking at them saying, "To me, they are beautiful feet." It served to increase my desire to join him when he returned to Wessel Lakes. I was impatient. Dr. Jaffrey had shared his vision for the day when it would be over. I just wanted it to start. When, Lord? When? Chapter 2. Our front bedroom became the Oval Office, where every fact of setting up a station in New Guinea was the main topic of discussion. The problem of carriers, transportation, supplies, and housing. Russell was not yet mobile. One morning, Dr. Jaffrey walked in to announce, "Russell, I have the answer. While in prayer, the Lord reminded me that the Babo Oil Company and all the other expeditions to New Guinea use Dayaks. We need Dayaks." Immediately, we all knew he was right. They were without peer when it came to river or jungle work, and where was a better place to get them than from the area where Russell had worked in Borneo? Dr. Jaffrey's letter to the resident missionary brought a speedy reply. In record time, 20 sturdy Christian Dayaks, their muscles rippling when they walked, arrived in Makassar by inter-island steamer. Mr. Post was dispatched to Ambon to make arrangements for housing the Dayaks and 3 teachers from our Bible school upon their arrival. In the days following the doctor's okay for Russell to be on his feet, I saw him only at meals and bedtime. A contract was drawn up and notarized for the Dayaks. They and the teachers had to be outfitted. Chinese artisans crafted lightweight trail tins with waterproof lids, tailored khaki shirts and trousers to fit Russell's thinner frame, and crafted his boots with cat's claws fitted to the soles. He purchased and packed food for 25 with the help of the Dyaks, who were staying in the Bible school dormitory. By March 5, all was in readiness. Pajak, from the same area as the carriers, was invaluable as their translator. He, Sarage, a well-educated schoolteacher from northern Sumatra, and Padapalhija, a schoolteacher from Ambon, were teamed to help in the ministry. They were very different in every way, yet they complemented one another and made a terrific team. The farewell service held at the tabernacle was an hour long, remembered. The Dyaks stood on the platform, attired in breech clouts and pillbox hats of finely woven fiber, and sang songs of praise to God in their own several-part harmony and language. A thrill went through the audience. I thought I'd never heard such beautiful music. The Dyaks' faces manifested gratitude when the whole congregation solemnly raised their hands in a pledge to pray for them as they went to New Guinea. Saying goodbye was much easier this time, knowing that Russell would have trustworthy, capable carriers and companions. At Ambon, they transshipped and were joined by Mr. Post, then continued on to Oeda. The Dyaks adeptly handled the coastal canoes through the first rapids, cutting the travel time to the base camp in half. There they sorted and packed supplies, then fashioned slings in which to carry the trail tins. The machete, or long knife, was as much a part of the Dyaks' attire as his loincloth. They were hand-forged and very sharp. Wherever the Dyaks walked, swinging their machetes, the jungle receded from around the bivouacs and along the trail. The supplies were transported over the trail by relay. This meant that Russell and the carriers traversed the trail twice to get everything in from the base camp. The Dyak carriers sought out easier and more direct routes, felling trees for bridges, or fashioning ladders for scaling the mountain walls, thus saving days on the trail. The Dyaks also hewed and burned out 3 splendid canoes shaped for speed and safety on Lake Panaia and the reticulated rivers of Kapaku country. Once at Anarotali, housing was the prime concern. 4 Dyaks were kept busy preparing materials for building an initial structure, sufficiently large to serve as storehouse and living quarters for the Dyaks and mission personnel. Trees were felled for the framework, tree bark was flattened and stacked for roof covering, bamboo mats were woven for walls, and rattan was collected for tying the building together. Everything was locally available with the exception of a few nails and the sheet of isinglass. The total cost of materials was approximately $20 US, 1939. The Dyaks, accustomed to rice and fish in plentiful supply in Borneo, found the sweet potato a poor substitute. Some became sick. It became apparent that someone must make a trip back to Ambon for further supplies. Russell was elected. He walked in driving rain for 5 days from 6 a.m. until 5 p.m. The trail was dreadful, but the day he left the base camp in a canoe in a tropical downpour was even worse. Arriving in Oeda, he was informed that the steamer was not scheduled to stop that month. But, he said, I prayed, and 2 days later I was aboard ship en route to Ambon. Since Russell would be in Ambon about a month before the next steamer to Oeda, I was granted permission to join him. In the 3 months since I had seen him last, he had gained weight and now weighed about 140 pounds. I stuck with him every glorious moment, and I'm sure there wasn't a full 24-hour day all month, or it wouldn't have ended so quickly. But end it did, and I found myself once more watching a steamer carrying him away. For how long this time, only the Lord knew.